We just bought a house that needed a lot of work. There is this weird room leading from the garage into the house. It had a closet that I knew we wouldn't use, so I decided to make it into a usable space. So I removed the bifold doors and removed all the hardware on the doors. After measuring the length and width of the closet, I transferred those measurements onto the doors and cut them to size. I had to cut both ends of the doors because the way the panels were laid out on the door, I didn't want to cut a panel in half. The width of the doors were wider than my cutting range on my saw, so I just had to flip them over to continue my cut. I cut both bifold doors this way. The doors are hollow core, so I needed to make sure they were strong enough to sit on. I took the ends of the doors that I had cut off and removed the front and the back panels, so I ended up with just a solid piece of wood on the end. The panels were easy to remove with a chisel and a hammer. I placed the end into the door and nailed it into place. Then I filled the gaps with wood filler for a cleaner look. After all the gaps and the wood filler had dried, I sanded everything smooth, including the door. Next, I primed and painted the door white. It took 1 coat of primer and 2 coats of interior paint. Now to cut the frame for the bench. I used 2x4s cut to size. I cut 6 14-inch pieces for the sides, 4 59-inch pieces for the top and bottom, and 6 13.5-inch pieces for the cross pieces. I used a Craig jig to drill the holes into the ends for a stronger joint. If you don't have a Craig jig, you could just screw them together at an angle, but they won't be near as strong. After I cut all the pieces, I laid the bottom of the bench out onto the bottom of the closet and screwed the pieces into place. Then the side or vertical pieces were next, which I screwed into the bottom of the frame. The top of the bench was built just like the bottom and assembled outside the closet. Once it was together, I placed it on the vertical pieces and screwed them into place. Now I had a nice solid frame. With the bifold doors cut to size, I used one for the front of the bench, sliding it into place. I had to use a rubber mallet because it was a little tight. I laid the other door on top, making sure it was nice and square. The doors were not as wide as the closet, so I measured the distance between the wall and the door and cut a 1x4 to size. I also cut thin pieces for each edge of the door of the bench. This was to ensure that when you lifted the bench lid up, you wouldn't scrape the sides of the wall. I painted those boards to match, laying the door and the 1x4 into place. I screwed the 1x4 into the frame. I filled the holes with wood putty, and then I screwed on the hinge. The bench was complete. After a fresh coat of paint on the walls, a new shelf, and some antique finds, the room was now functional space that we use every day. The extra storage we now have is great for all of our beach gear and outdoor items. I hope this inspires you to transform an unused area in your home into something amazing.